Welcome everyone to another edition to As Above, So Below Radio. I'm your host, Martin Hodgson, and it gives me great pleasure to have you tuning in today. When you get a chance, please visit the website holisticadvocate.com and sign up for our free newsletter. Also, take a moment to subscribe and become a member. You'll not only gain access to our commercial-free subscriber-based interviews, but also treat yourself to an assortment of fascinating people worth listening to. Today's guest is Dr. Norma Milanovich. Norma has co-written several books, most notably We the Arcturians, A Sacred Journey to Atlantis, and The Light Shall Set You Free. She also has a website which showcases many of her other projects, workshops, and events. Join me in welcoming her as we discuss the Arcturians. Well, I'd like to first of all welcome to the show. Very warm welcome indeed. And I got some questions here to ask you here. First of all, for anyone who's just tuning in, once this is, of course, put online, could you give a brief description on your background and what episode in your life enabled you to pursue your interest in what you do with the Arcturians?
Wow, that's rather a detailed question because, it was actually years ago that I first became awakened to these beings. And also, the awakening process itself took a long time. I think anyone who has these experiences understands that the whole experience is so overwhelming and complex that it isn't something that can happen overnight. But my background, when I was first contacted by these beings, and in this case the beings from what are called the star Arcturus, I was a professor at the University of New Mexico, and prior to that I had been an instructor at University of Houston for 6 years, where I had received my master's and my doctor's degree. Mm-hmm. And then I was full-time as a professor at UNM. And when they first contacted me, they communicated telepathically. At least that's what I picked up on. They might have been trying to get my attention, but I was just too dense to see the signs. Mm-hmm. But there came a time when they started communicating telepathically through automatic handwriting, mm-hmm. first through spirit guides and then on to the Arcturians, the fifth dimensional beings. And then following that, they introduced me to higher level beings, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth dimensional beings, mm-hmm. following proper protocol, but I could only connect with them when my personal vibrations were at a high enough level to be able to communicate with beings vibrating at a higher level. So I started with spirit guides because evidently that's where I was at the time, more connected to Earth. And from there it was the Arcturians, which moved to the fifth dimension. And then through proper protocol, one by one, I was introduced to other beings. Mm-hmm. So at that time, I was a professor, had been for almost 20 years. And that's kind of how it started.
Just out of curiosity, have you ever had any psychic episodes when you were really young? Maybe premonitions, or had seen any visions, something in effect that might have given you some clues early on at a young age?
No, not when I was young. Mm-hmm. But I found out later that my path was, in this lifetime, that I was to remain with a veil down over my eyes, so to speak, mm-hmm. and until I was 40. And evidently it was either my soul's contract or it was some karmic responsibility or part of my mission, maybe so that I could be more grounded in the third dimensional world around so that I wouldn't be so excitable and flippant, when these things occurred when I would be older and more mature. But at exactly the time I turned 40, whoa, my whole life was turned upside down. I mean, it was just amazing. From one day to the next, I could see things into the future.
Wow.
I could then finish people's thoughts, communicate telepathically. I could sense things. I had clairaudient abilities, clairvoyant abilities, and my interest was unsatiable. I just wanted more and more information, and I didn't know where to turn for it because that wasn't my world. In the university, if you're not into this, you don't have many avenues to explore it.
Right.
So that's kind of what happened to me early on. When I was 40, night and day, just like overnight. But that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Right.
Well, evidently, that was my timing. The veil was lifted, and the skills I carried in my soul from past lifetimes just automatically went into effect. But it was rather disconcerting because I didn't have a background in this lifetime to know what they were. I just knew that I hadn't lost it. I knew that I was the same person I was before. I just had different skills and abilities. And then it was the test of how to use them, how to enhance them, and then ultimately, what do I use them for?
Right.
How to figure out what your mission is and what your role in life is. But when you're on a spiritual path, as you would know, Martin, someone always comes in. It's a book, it's a person, a teacher. When that student is ready, God sends the teacher so that you have someone that you can align with.
Okay.
And that person will always help, or the book will, or the TV show or something.
Right. Now, would you care to mention any of your books you've written and your website to our listening audience?
I would love to do that. First of all, the website is www. First word is Athena, Athena, like the goddess Athena. And then there's 4 more letters, an abbreviation for Leadership Center, and it's lctr.com. So it's info@Athena, lctr.com. Or you could go to www.ourtrustisingod.com, and that will take you to the same website. Okay. And the 3 books that I've written and with other people who were with me, co-authors and beautiful friends and colleagues, is the first one that came out of these experiences was called We the Arcturians. And that one was written with Betty Rice and Cynthia Plosky. We all lived in Albuquerque together. They came over every week with a list of questions. We put them in the computer. I connected with the Arcturians, and we channeled the information, brought it all through, organized it in a book, and literally we were blown away by the information. It was some of it so technical and exciting, but yet it was still a book about personal empowerment because it was all about the 5th dimension and where Earth is headed. So if you read it, and you see where they are in the 5th dimension and what they do, you get a glimpse of what our future will be like and what we are transforming ourselves into, because on every dimension there's different laws and rules, and we have to change to accommodate. The second book was called Sacred Journey to Atlantis. That was written with the help of Jean Miltison. And that was the first journey summarized that the Ascended Masters led us on. And at that point, I was bringing through messages from higher level beings, the sixth and seventh dimensional beings. And one time I was surprised, and I received a message, and they said, how would you like to take a group into the Bermuda Triangle? And it's like, oh, sure, why not? I mean, who doesn't, right? Let's go there, have a good time.
Exactly.
Well, we did. And instantly, in a matter of a few weeks, there were, I think on that journey, there were 43 people signed up and came from nowhere. I didn't even know these people, but I put the word out, and we were all set to go. We went to Bimini, had the most extraordinary experience working with these beings, and as a result, I was compelled to write the book with Jean regarding what our perceptions were of that journey as humans in comparison to what the beings that were guiding us said was actually happening and what we witnessed.
Right.
So we tried to write the comparison to show the difference between 3D reality and what was a higher dimensional reality. And that book turned out to be very successful, too. I mean, both of them just kind of took off because people were so interested and they were very, very hungry for the information.
Right.
And then the third book is called The Light Shall Set You Free. And this is a book that I wrote with Dr. Shirley McCune. She's been my good colleague and friend in the educational field for over 30 years, very awakened being like myself.
Right.
And this is a book about empowerment. It's about the universal laws, God's laws, and what we need to do to follow those kinds of laws and rules to be able to improve ourselves. And once you understand them, and then you start living your life in alignment with them, there's little resistance. You go with the flow, and the power that starts coming with it is absolutely phenomenal in manifestation, in clearing your karma, in changing your personality. You become more kind, less worrisome, and well, it comes with a whole basket of rewards.
Right.
And that book is a one on personal empowerment. And then I brought through newsletters called Celestial Voices for years, and they sent through the universal laws, not just the universal laws for Earth, but the higher cosmic laws as we go into the fifth dimension and higher.
Right.
And there's so many of them and processes in that. That information is just so timeless. And anyone who reads that, and especially The Light Shall Set You Free, every time you read those documents, you will get a whole new perspective. It's like reading a whole new book because they're vibrationally coded. And when you read them the first time and you're vibrating at a certain level, you will receive one message. Read it again 3 months later, and all of a sudden, nothing is the same. And you're getting another set of pieces of information that help you evolve and understand and grow and expand your mind. And that happens every single time. I think what the masters have used me for over the years, those represent some of the highest work of the masters possible. And everyone who reads them has said the same thing. I mean, thousands and thousands of people have read those over the years and studied them, and they've used them in groups. The book is used in universities, and it's used in study groups in that worldwide. And so I receive a lot of good comments about those and how helpful they've been.
Very interesting. Now, I also understand that you also conduct workshops as well?
Yes, I have done that for years, and on my website I've taped several of them, and they are available. I've done workshops in helping a person understand who these beings are and how to work with them. and some of the tools that are available so that anyone can be connected.
Mm-hmm.
I've done workshops in one called Solar Initiations, where I actually teach people how to communicate telepathically. And all this information has come from these celestial beings. They've taught me, and then I turn around and am able to put it in a workshop and teach others. And in that workshop, I have a pretty high level of success. Probably 85 to 90% of the people, once they do the exercises, can actually read another person in the room accurately because the techniques are grounded, and it's all about skill development as the way it's been presented to me. That's a very popular workshop. I have another one called Merlin's Magic, where we talk about the power of the animal kingdom, we talk about the power of the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom, and how to work with the angelic kingdom, even using the Kabbalah. And that too has come through from the celestial realms, and they're all filled with knowledge, activities, and practical skills that people can take with them. And then another one is soul retrieval. People don't even understand that one of our greatest journeys in life today is to retrieve the pieces of our souls that we've left behind through traumas in past lives. And I have a 2-day workshop on how to use your everyday experiences to retrieve those soul fragments. And once you are able then to energetically pull them together, you're then able to connect with your oversoul, your higher passions, your higher qualifications, and then your mission is revealed more quickly because you're whole and you're not going forward into battle like without one arm or something like that. And I've got others too, but that's just an idea, of some of the workshops that they've trained me in over the years.
Wow. Now you also have CDs as well on your website, correct?
Yes, well the workshops are in CDs. They're not in video.
Right.
I do have one video years ago that I presented to a group of physicists and mathematicians and that in, I think it was near Cambridge, Massachusetts. And that one is on video, and I had messages from the beings, and it's interesting, but those professional people that were there were also having the same kind of experiences, which is why they all came to that conference. And that one is called, I haven't read it for a while, I think it's like Entering the Fifth Dimension or something. And that's a very exciting one too. In addition, I have CDs that are in music form. I've been privileged to have met and have worked extensively with a colleague and friend from Canada called, and his name is Paul Armitage. And Paul is, he's so gifted as an artist, and he has played my background music in many of my events. And he has the ability also to connect with the higher self and oversoul to others, and he can bring through music soul portraits through for the person. Well, the masters guided me on very critical journeys that they sent us on all over the world. There was an agenda, and we had to capture an energetic to be able to transmute it and transform it for that part of the world. And Paul was able to capture the blueprint through the oversoul of the group membership. And in some cases we had like 150 people there from all over the world, and they were really, large groups, exciting, energetic, pure spirits of people from everywhere around the world. And he could capture the portrait, like one is called Healing a Rift in Time. And it's one, for example, it was all about forgiveness and opening up the age of Pisces, closing the age of Pisces, and entering the age of Aquarius. And literally what happened to Christ, when he came 2,000 years ago, and then the return of the Christ now. And so by Paul capturing that music and we placing them on CDs, we were able then to capture the codes from the heavenly realms. Paul did.
Right.
And we held it as a group. His music is phenomenal. And when you listen to it, for example, if you had a person who was really having difficulty with forgiveness, and they had major issues, and they were trying, and they couldn't forgive, get the CDs. There's 2 of them in that set. There's 4 compositions in there, 4 steps in the series. All they have to do is listen to the CDs, and instantly it goes into their DNA codes. And all of a sudden the transmutation begins on the inner side of themselves. And it makes it so much easier then to let go and to move to a higher path. And we've done several. One was called Knights and Angels when he sent us to the Middle East, and we did one there working with the angelic kingdom and as messengers to God. Another was Healing the Rift in Time. And then there's others. You could see them on the website, but they're so powerful. And it's such a delight to see people listening to beautiful music and suddenly their issues that are holding them back suddenly disappearing. Just dissolving by listening to the music, and because of the hard work that we did. It would take like 2 weeks to do the work, working with the Ascended Masters on these journeys, following their guidelines, everything that needed to be done instantly, setting it into the grid, and then having Paul there with his fantastic abilities, capturing the codes. And now what took us 2 weeks and thousands of dollars to be able to produce and clear for the planet, someone in an hour can listen to the music and already be at that level. So I'm really proud to be able to have those on the website too.
Great. Okay, now shifting back to the Arcturians here, you mentioned that at age 40 they introduced themselves to you, right? At that point in your life, is that correct?
Well, they did. I had an introductory, like a prerequisite session in that my husband's sister, Margie and George, their daughter, their 9th grade daughter, Tracy, suddenly died. We were living down in Albuquerque, and they were up in Minnesota. I hardly knew my niece because we lived across the country, and she was in 9th grade. She was a straight-A student, so popular. In fact, after her death, I understand they even named a wing of a school after her. She had just come in winning a marathon the day before, and she was one of these children that just collapsed. You know, she didn't get up from bed the next morning. You know, you hear about these soccer kids and, you know, they go over to tie their shoe and suddenly they just fall over for no reason at all. And and she happened, whatever that syndrome is, she happened to be in that category. And, of course, the family was so distraught because she was such a perfect angel. And here I'm awakening, and I'm not saying anything to any of my family members or anything, or very little to them. And all of a sudden, one day, as I'm trying to figure it out and bringing through messages privately on my own, suddenly a different message starts coming through. And she told me it was Tracy. Well, we had just heard, like a day before, that she had passed on, and we were planning to go to the funeral in a few days, fly up there. But I'm getting a message from her. And she suddenly starts taking control of my pen, and she draws hearts and butterflies all over the page and writes messages. And, you know, because she knew at that point, you know, that her mother and father were so distraught, as was the family. And she was trying, I think, to ease the pain, and knew that I was the, you know, the vulnerable point, you know, where she could probably reach me, and of course she did. Well, in the meantime, I bring through many messages, and I'm wondering, what am I going to do with these? You know, they're already distraught. Am I going to start bringing this up in the middle of that? And I was very, you know, perplexed regarding what I should do. And my husband's mother and father knew. They were living with us in Albuquerque, and they could see this. And I asked her, I said, Mom, I said, you make the decision. Do you think I should share this with Margie and George or not? And They said, yes, go ahead and do it. They felt like that I should. So I brought them aside, and I took them in another room, and I showed them the messages. Well, it turns out that the handwriting was very, very similar to Tracy's, and they went and got her diary, which I'd never seen because I'd never, I didn't even hardly know my niece at all. I'd hardly seen her in my entire life. And every single page, she had flowers and butterflies, the same kind, that she was drawing through me. So to us, that was proof that something bigger than us was going on. Right. And so that was my first introduction, was to be able to capture a communication to that level on the spirit guide. But shortly after that was the harmonic convergence. And we were already spiritually awakening. And I knew then that this was bigger than me, that something was going on. And by then I was meeting people all over the world who had the same experiences as me. So I didn't feel like I was the odd man out anymore. And so we went ahead and we went to Sedona. And I was guided to buy a special crystal in one of the Sedona rock shops. And they told me then, this comes from a special place, and, it'll help you communicate to extraterrestrials. It was a celestite crystal. And I thought, okay, fine, no problem. Little by little, you kind of get used to this because it's such an unusual world.
Sure.
So we leave after a few days. We go back to Albuquerque. And I put the crystal on my computer. And by then I'm communicating not by hand, but by computer. I'd been moved up to that level. And all of a sudden I get a message, and they introduce themselves, and they start saying they were celestial beings. And the information was totally different from what I was getting on this spiritual guide level. So I thought, whoa, and I thought, is this, every time when you're awakening, you question everything. Is this real?
Sure.
And, and so I went that route, and you fight it a little bit, and then you're curious enough, and you keep going, and so that's what I did. And then that eventually led to the communications with the Arcturians, which at that point changed my entire life, because I entered an arena then, which is called the UFO arena, that was beyond anything I could imagine. And so I hope that answered your question, Martin.
Well, yes, because, coming from a academic background, you're pretty much trained to be objective and deal with empirical data, deal with the facts. But this totally shifted your perspective on life in general. I mean, for you to go from an academic environment to something more spiritually inclined, that must have been a really shock to you, correct?
Oh, it was. But there was one thing that, a consistent thread that I was able to hold on to, and that is, while I was going through all these experiences, for my entire life, on my Bachelor of Science degree, or Master of Science degree, and then my doctor's degree, the one area that I always loved the most was psychology.
Right.
And I never became a psychologist. I got a Doctor of Education. I was at the College of Education, and I loved teaching and training, and that was my passion, so that's where I went. But every elective that I could take, I always took it in the psychology area just because I loved it and it was fun. And by the time I got my doctor's degree at University of Houston, I had then, almost 30 hours. I didn't make it into a formal minor and become a counselor or something because I wanted education, but I had enough hours if I wanted to do that. And that was my consistent thread, my foundation, if you will, that helped me get through all of this in these early years, because I knew psychology. I knew the human mind. I taught educational psychology sections in my classes at the university. I understood, how to change behavior, and that's what you do as a teacher. You work with psychology all day long with different personalities, and we have to train people how to do it in the classroom. So I knew I wasn't losing it. And just because I have these different skills and abilities, but I knew that it was outside the realm of normalcy and that the public was accepting. And then when I could do things with my mind, I could channel answers, I could channel information that was outside of me reading a book or getting the information. I even had a conversation with my dean one day. I showed him. I said, "You're not going to believe what's happened to me." And we talked about it, but I was very honest on a private level with certain people. I didn't want them to be surprised. And I explained, I said, this is going to change education in 20, 30, 50 years from now. I said, if it's happening to me, and I never expected it to, I said, who else is this happening to? And the children coming in. I said, we're going to have to get a head start on this and figure out how we're going to change education.
Right.
Well, neither of us had answers. I mean, who would? This was 20-some years ago, and people don't have answers today hardly, much less 20 years ago. But we acknowledged it, and then I began to get instruction from these beings on how to increase one's mental faculties, your extra perception abilities and all of this, and I found out in workshops that they worked. And I thought, well, this is it. And that was why I didn't go off the deep end, I think, because I had an academic background that helped me study like a researcher, each aspect, but in this case it was an N of one. It was just me. I was the only study, that I was focusing on at that point. But then when I started doing workshops and journeys worldwide with these beings and meeting thousands and thousands of people around the world who were having the same experiences, that's when I really began to get comfortable. I no longer questioned it. I wouldn't even waste my time saying, is this real or is this not real, or are we going nuts in this? And they're still doing that today, and I'm telling you that it aggravates me. Just get on with it. This is real. It's a worldwide phenomenon, and the sooner we get there, the better off we're going to be as a society, as a human race. But, people have to have their dramas, just like I did when I was first awakening. I played my little games then too, but I don't have patience for that anymore because it's been so many years and I know it's real.
Right. Now, when it comes to their appearance, would it be safe to make the suggestion that they look similar to the grays that we've been accustomed to? Or can you give a accurate description of the Arcturians?
Well, I think they look similar. I can see them when I journey interdimensionally, and they describe themselves. My friend had drawn the picture, and we put a simple two-dimensional drawing in there, based on their instructions of what they look like. But they're not the same color. They're like maybe a bluish green, almost like a purple aura color to it. And from what I have read, very little, because I haven't read a lot of UFO books. I'm too busy bringing through my own experiences. But from what I've been able to understand, many believe that the Greys do not have a very high agenda. They're extremely intelligent beings, but they maybe don't have the best interests for humanity in mind all the time. Whereas according to the Arcturians and what they have demonstrated for more than 20 years regarding their willingness and purpose for helping humanity evolve, the Arcturians are totally dedicated to helping as many souls evolve and advance into the fifth dimension as they can get through the portal. But it seems like the Greys might have an agenda that wants to enslave or keep people down. and I hope I'm not giving them bad press here, because I've never, to my knowledge, been connected with that group, but I can speak for the Arcturians and Pleiadians and those. They have, to me, a 100% track record of only helping humanity.
Right.
And whatever the Greys do, I don't know, because I don't think I've ever been connected to them.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, what's their source of nourishment? What is their lifespan like?
Oh, you know what? Martin, you and the audience have to read my book, We the Arcturians. Do you know that I've not read this book in probably 15 years?
Oh,
and I know it's in there, though.
Yeah.
And they talk about energy. They talk about how we feed with three-dimensional things like food and liquids and things like that. They get theirs from the light, I remember, or they get things from like etheric sources of nourishment that feed their soul.
Right.
And but to be honest, I haven't read it in so many years that I can't quote it verbatim, and I certainly wouldn't want to be a spokesperson for them and be inaccurate, but it's all in the book.
Yes, I'm looking at the book as we speak, and you're citing that they get their nourishment from the great central sun?
Yeah, that's another word that they use, I believe, for God.
Okay.
In other words, they, almost like breatharians maybe, they have the ability to absorb the love and light or their nourishment directly from the source, from the God source.
Right. Okay. Now, with the Arcturians, there is also a reference in the book that cites that we, as a species, we're very emotional beings, and we're also an undisciplined species as well. Would it be safe to assume that because of this, it impairs our growth spiritually?
I think emotion for humans, if I'm hearing your question accurately, emotions for humans are the cosmic glue for manifestation and creation. They align with our belief systems and our will and our desires, and this is how we learn to manifest, especially when we become awakened. I think when you don't control your emotions and your emotional and mental body, there's two, emotional body and mental body, I believe that they can be very destructive in that, because it's all about our evolution, when you don't control your thoughts and your emotions and you're very negative and harmful and hurtful to others in that, it not only can spill over onto someone else and bring you karma and bad luck, but it also retards your own path to becoming one with the God source. And that on one level, is that bad? Well, if you've got many chances to do it right, is it all about each of us, trying over and over and over again and then doing it right, and then you move on? And it's all about, Earth is a place where we have free will and we can take our time. But the problem with uncontrolled emotions that are negative and harmful is that they have a tendency to not only harm ourselves, but others, or possibly our communities. Look at what's just happened in Connecticut, and all of these different places that in cities and wars and all of this. And from that standpoint, I'm a person of peace and wanting that so badly so that we can all become our full human potential with peace and love surrounding and nurturing us in that. And to me, all of that, this stuff that's going on the planet right now enslaves people, and it just wastes our time, because the inevitable should be that we are going to make it to that finish line, and we're going to be filled with the light and the peace that is above all understanding. So I feel like, it just gets in our way. And I think that's what the Arcturians maybe were trying to express too, that at one time maybe they were more like us. But when you get into higher vibrations, you can't carry that stuff with you.
Right.
You have to choose. You either stay behind or you change your behavior and you move on. And that's what I think the point they were trying to make, is they made a choice as a civilization, and now they're very high-level beings.
Right. Okay, now, for most listeners, I'm pretty certain most listeners are aware that the human race, as we know it, was pretty much a culmination of different DNA from different species. In other words, we were genetically seeded. And I know the Arcturians, they played a role in genetically seeding us and so forth. So in effect, in reading the book, I read that they had established a colony here on Earth. And somehow a warlike race invaded the planet, and they had to escape. And in reading this passage in the book, I'm kind of wondering if, in fact, these warlike invaders could have been the Anunnaki.
I think that that's quite possible, and I don't ever remember them saying that at that time. But knowing what other sources have brought through that have been more specific than what the Arcturians transmitted at the time, I would say that that's probably the case. And to be honest with you, I still feel like they're probably still around and trying to take over this planet when you look at everything that's happening on Earth today.
Right.
I think that, they might even be shapeshifters and in human form, or have a whole variety of other ways in which they can operate that the normal innocent human isn't even accustomed to experiencing. So yeah, I'm not going to say that because the Arcturians didn't say it, but I think that's a reasonable assumption, Martin.
Right. Okay, now I'm pretty certain you're familiar with America's sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce, right?
Oh yes, I've heard of him several. I've never read any of his books or transmissions, but I see excerpts in shows like on A&E Television, History Channel, etc. and that. So yes, I'm pretty much aware of his work.
Yeah, I'm just citing this because he was quoted as once saying that Arcturus is the highest civilization in our galaxy. Would you agree with that? That Arcturus is the highest civilization in our galaxy?
Well, I don't know if I would say they were the highest, but if they aren't the highest, I would say they rank right up there. I think in a universe, as Carl Sagan would say, with billions and billions and billions of stars and planets, to rank one as the highest today might not do the others justice, because there's probably several competing for that. But every single interaction I've had in the communications with these beings have literally given me the impression that they truly rank among the highest of beings that I had ever had the privilege of interacting with.
Okay, are we talking about like highest in vibration or highest in spiritual comparison to other species, technology, or is it just an amalgamation of everything?
On some level, it would be an amalgamation of everything. I don't know that the Arcturians are the highest in science, maybe. From what they conveyed to me, because they always honored their sisters and brothers, because they like towns and estates and that, they knew, because they knew the others in the universe. They knew what they were capable of, at least in the transmissions they sent me. But they always talk about Alpha Centauri as having some of the highest theoretical minds in the universe. They would talk about the souls of the beings from Sirius as being some of the greatest builders in this part of the universe. In other words, they said that primarily the souls from Sirius and Sirius B are the ones that built the pyramids and the whole Egyptian culture. And they never took credit for that, but they would honor them. They had always said that the Pleiadians were the highest in music, that most of the great composers and souls in that would have either training or that the souls would come from the Pleiades, sent to Earth. to incarnate down here, to bring through tremendous accomplishments in the music field. So the Arcturians always made it clear to me, anyway, that their specialty was in it was almost like human resource development, education, advancing the human, and what they had for their technology, their knowledge and wisdom was unsurpassed. So I'm going to keep my opinion in that area, and yet they were masters of protocol. They were masters of dignity. They were the kindest whenever a message would come through. The wisest, I don't care what we asked. Didn't make a difference at all. They always had an answer. And it would come through so fast on the computer. All I had to do was listen and bring through the words so fast and everything. And so, anyway, that's what I'm going to say, because I don't really know.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, too, in reading more of Mr. Casey, he's been referred to as being the father of the Arcturians. And in your sessions with the Arcturians, have they ever mentioned that to you?
No, but I haven't really connected with the Arcturians in more than 20 years. I did for a little while. Someone was interested, and we were bringing through messages on specific topics and that maybe about 7, 8 years ago. But, it doesn't mean that he wasn't. It could mean that his soul comes from Arcturus. And he was one of the greatest souls that they ever sent to Earth. And it could mean something simple like that. That his primary existence was connected to that part of the universe, just like we all are. We're eclectic. We've got many experiences. We don't just have an embodiment on Earth, but we have embodiments in many different realities.
Right.
And different dimensions and parallel universes. It isn't just here.
Right. Okay, now getting back to what I asked before about the human species being rather, for that matter, very emotional, my understanding is that as we migrate to the fifth dimension, there is an axiom that states that your thoughts create your reality. Now, in 3D, this might take a while to manifest, right?
Right.
But in 5D, your thoughts are, in effect, instantaneous. So
that's what they have said, yes.
Yeah. So are the Arcturians actually helping us to understand this principle as we ascend from 3D, going through 4D, and ultimately to 5D?
Well, they did through the messages that they sent to me at the time, and then I, with their help, translated them into workshops, and there's a lot of information in my workshops regarding how to manifest and how to create your reality, and based on the technical laws and the techniques and everything that they were sending through. So I believe that they did, and they took great care and chose their words very carefully regarding what to do and what not to do. They've also said that a human being can live in the third dimension, have a 3D body, but the ultimate goal in the transition is to transmute the mind into a fifth dimensional mind while being in a third dimensional body before a total ascension, into another dimension. So they made it clear that when a person is on a spiritual path, that's one of the main reasons why they have to master their emotional body and their mental body. Because on a spiritual path, you're raising your vibrational frequency and you're entering a higher dimensional time-space. Well, if there's instant manifestation there, but you're going through the portal and you're not watching what you say, you're not watching what you think, what you feel, what you believe, you're going to come through there, you're going to act like a tornado, where all the others are watching what they're doing, so they're manifesting a Garden of Eden around there, around themselves, and then here you come, and because you haven't taken the time, every thought that you're thinking, throws hand grenades at everybody else's creation and stuff, and that's obviously what is not wanted or needed up there. That's why there's a filtering process. That's why we're tested, and we have to be observed, to make sure that we're the quality that won't get up there and then start destroying instead of creation. Because the fifth dimension is truly about creation. It's not about destruction, not what they do on the third dimension. You just have a beautiful civilization and architecture and everything, and then they blow it up. Right. And you have to start all over again, and that's what souls who want to bring you down do, that devolved and that destruction. But when you're on a spiritual path, like the Arcturians are leading us, that's about evolution. It's about the light, raising the vibrations. And you leave all of this stuff, the war and destruction and harm and those kinds of qualities behind. So you've got to watch your mind. Even Jesus said, the power of life and death is in the tongue. You have got to watch what you say, because he obviously was a very, very high-level being coming to Earth to teach us and show us the way, but he came down at a time when there were no schools. There was no science. Nobody had heard these words, and all he could say was, I am the light of the world, and talk about it in those terms. But people, they didn't have school or physics or science. They didn't have a clue, except their faith. And then it was the faith in the last 2,000 years that brought people through to be able to now embrace, the teachings. Well, the Arcturians are coming in. They work in this high-level celestial community, and they're literally trying to not only warn us, but they're also trying to teach us, because we now are being invited into their world. And they look at Earth and what we have to offer, and they're not too happy. Would you be? I mean, look at this planet.
Yeah.
And knowing that you had a peaceful existence and you were into creation and that, and here come the neighbors, through the procession of the equinox, they're entering. It's like, oh man, would I be in my spaceship trying to figure out, how we can teach these people fast to be able to live in harmony up here, rather than bring what they're used to into our backyard.
So in effect, as we ascend to 5D, we do become co-creators with God.
Absolutely. Right. And that's what it's all about, the sons and daughters of God. And even Jesus said that. He said, everything I can do, so shall ye and more. And many more will come after me, and greater things will they do. Well, that's happening now all over the world. There's a few going first. It's just like the tip of the arrow. And because there's only a few going first, and they're the change agents, for the mass majority of people, they don't understand it, so they're a little bit skeptical. They're wondering, hey, what is this all about? I can't do this, and it doesn't affect me, but does it make it not real for the people who are that point of that arrow? No. Change agents always have the hardest job, no matter where they're employed. And those light workers now that are coming down on the planet are going first. They're developing their skills first and hopefully gently showing the way to others, so that everyone in time can share the same skills, abilities, and joy that comes from creation.
Okay. Now, does ascending to 5D require that we open up our heart center? In other words, is forgiveness the key? Letting go of hatred, those bad emotions, letting go, forgiveness, are these the key words one needs to adhere to?
They're absolutely essential. Yes. The answer is yes.
Good.
There's no way you can be both. It's like being a little bit pregnant. No way. You either have to buy the package or you don't. And your free will decide if you're going to stay back or if you're going to go forward. It's that simple. Love and forgiveness, loving God and having forgiveness are the keys. Let it go. No matter what is happening at any time in your life, let it go. It's like the Beatles song, I think about Mother Mary, let it be, that beautiful song. On some level, they probably channeled it. They knew it. They got it.
Right.
Just let things go, and that's what forgiveness is about. It's don't even dwell on it anymore. Just go forward.
Now, do you offer any workshops dealing with these themes we just covered?
I don't have any scheduled right now, but if anyone was interested and they did not know of my work, I would strongly recommend that they order. I don't know how many I have, probably 4 or 5, but go to the website and have them check it out and order those and listen to those first. And then when I start again developing more workshops and that, then they will have the foundation to be able to understand more advanced work. And the workshops do not repeat themselves. There is new information in every single one, and they will make a tremendous difference in anyone's life. I don't have any scheduled right now because I've just taken a couple years off. I designed a home, moved from Scottsdale, Arizona up to Montana, just built this home, designed it with all sacred geometry, worked with the masters, got everything perfected in it. It's studied feng shui, classical feng shui for 18 years, placed everything into it, and I had to take a couple of years off. Well, I'm in the home now, and I'm ready and able now to start doing other things in the last few months and continuing on with the journeys that I've taken people on. And anyone can just write to us if they want to get on our mailing list and look at the website. And when I start scheduling things again, for example, I think I have one coming up in North Carolina. We haven't set the dates yet. And Norway. I'm going to be in Norway in June. We've set those dates. I'm starting now to begin to balance my life again and put things together, so we'll have it on the website.
Fantastic. Okay, Norma, we are approaching the end of the first hour for our listeners. Before we depart the first hour, would you care to remind our listeners your website and the books that you have there? You
want the website address again? Sure.
Yeah, for our listeners.
The website address is www.athenalctr.com. athenalctr.com or www.ourtrustisingod.com. And the 3 books are We the Arcturians. The second book is Sacred Journey to Atlantis. And the third book is The Light Shall Set You Free. And there's lots of CDs and workshops and other things on the site as well, including personal readings and also intensives that I do with individuals. And I think that should be enough.
Great. That's it for the first hour on As Above, So Below Radio. Tune in for the second hour by subscribing to HolisticAdvocate.com, where Norma will further discuss the Arcturians and her mystical journey to what was once the island continent of Atlantis. You're listening to As Above, So Below Radio.